There are some people who get a different sensation in their belly button when they do things like sit down after they've had bottom surgery.
The human body is a weird and wonderful creation, isn't it? Hello, it is I, Sister Babushka,
And I am Sister Alaska Lots.
and this is utter nonsense.
This is the show where we pour a nice hot cup of tea.
And we utter whatever nonsense pops into our heads.
This is basically a very laid back chat between good friends.
And a new episode is uploaded once a month, every month, at the start of the month.
And we release other videos every week in between.
And for eagle-eyed viewers, they'll also notice that there's maybe something different about how we look.
You may have noticed that we have a very slightly different headpiece happening now. Exciting.
Yes, as the House of Nunsense expands, we're just trying out a new look. Think it's going quite well, don't you, Alaska?
I'm really liking the new headpiece. So you can expect from now onwards to start seeing this headpiece in more and more videos. It makes me feel quite, I don't know, regal, like a crown upon mine head.
As March has Trans Visibility Day in it, we thought one thing that we know is that fear often comes from ignorance. And so we really wanted to help demystify what it is to go through the trans experience and what it is to live as a trans person.
Today, we thought it would be fun to try and answer the questions that you would never dare ask a trans person. And for the purposes of education, we are going to attempt to answer some of those questions.
And I think we've went to our good old favourite of the show, Reddit.
What a surprise! We found a very helpful Reddit thread, and there were lots of questions that were asked in there. So we decided that we would answer some of these questions publicly for your entertainment and for your education.
All about educating the people of today.
So I think that we should go on to the questions.
Jazz hands, those are always excited.
Okay, on to the questions where we hope to demystify some things around the trans experience. And the very first question that Reddit has provided is, do periods go away when you start T? Which, for anyone who doesn't know, stands for testosterone. And is there a way to get rid of them without surgery?
Well, I think with almost most things in life, it's a very case-by-case basis. And actually, for some folks, the answer is yes. And for others, it's going to be no.
So there are a variety of things that can affect people's periods. And one of them is IUDs, which are more commonly known as the coil. It's a device that sits inside the uterus and is most often T-shaped rather than coil-shaped. For some reason, I expected it to be coil-shaped. And it just prevents the uterine lining from building up. So it means that it can lessen periods and potentially even stop them altogether. And this also is a birth control option. So, without the lining, you're not going to get pregnant. I'm just going to say, I'm not the biggest fan of them. Anyway, they can stop periods from happening. And that's got nothing to do with being on T or being trans in any way.
Other ways that can help stop periods is taking birth control. So, for example, taking the pill, usually there is the 1 week where you will then take a sort of placebo to allow for the bleeding to happen. But actually, if you just keep taking the pill, you can just stop the periods. Body says no.
I just thought it was worth mentioning that we do not recommend people use the pill to stop their periods because that comes with other health risks. Consult your healthcare provider before you do anything like that. Thank you.
For transmasculine folks, the most reliable way to get rid of periods is by having a full hysterectomy with oophorectomy which also helps reduce the amount of estrogen that's then produced in the body.
So there you go. That's a whole lot about periods that you probably never knew before.
So, next question. Do you get to choose a size?
Oh, that is an interesting question. I suspect that for trans masculine people, it depends on how much skin they can actually safely graft, which means that there will be a maximum that they can do before it just becomes unviable.
This is true of a phalloplasty, which, for those that don't know, is the operation that takes a skin graft to make the shaft of the penis. And for those who want a fuck off, for all the people commenting how bad I am at pronunciation, just imagine how many edits we take trying to get the right word out of me sometimes. Metoidioplasty, which is a form of bottom surgery that uses existing tissue to make the phallus instead of taking a skin graft from somewhere else on the person's body. That does make a penis that's a bit shorter because it does rely on the growth that's already happened while that person is taking testosterone. So once the person's been on testosterone long enough, that growth will stop, and that is when the metoidioplasty can then take place.
For people who are on testosterone, it does make the clitoris grow and behave more like a penis, but the length that you actually get while on testosterone can vary. So the metoidioplasty just adds to that. Our next question says, does sitting down feel different after you get bottom surgery?
So again, it is a sort of personal person-by-person experience, but some trans women have said that sitting down 3 months after bottom surgery is a bitch. Obviously, you're still recovering from a medical operation, and all the irritated flesh obviously can be quite painful. Just like when we've went through any other sort of surgery in hospital, it can take a while for healing to happen, and that does mean that there will be sensitivity, and that can vary from person to person in terms of how severe that pain feels.
Ultimately, the experiences told by trans people suggest that eventually, once that healing has happened, sitting down feels largely the same. The only difference is whether or not you've got extra bits in the way or not. I think you would get used to it over time, but yeah, initially it would be very, very weird because it's such a new sensation. There is a thing that can happen though, where this is very strange. When the nerves regrow, it can actually affect the feeling in your belly button. And so there are some people who get a different sensation in their belly button when they do things like sit down after they've had bottom surgery. This might not be how you pronounce it. We're not great at pronouncing things here, but I believe it's to do with the pudendal nerve.
I find that really interesting.
Nerves are such weird things. I have nerve damage in one side of me, and that means that only half of me can feel that I'm sitting down, and the other half can't. And I'm used to it now, so it's not a problem. But when that first happened, it was so confusing. The first time I was sitting in the hospital bed afterwards, I thought that there was like a crease or a dip in the bed. So I kept like trying to shuffle to the side and then to the other side to see if I could like move away from it. And it turned out it was just me. There was no crease, no dip. I just couldn't feel that section of me when I was sitting.
The human body is a weird and wonderful creation, isn't it?
It's very odd, yeah.
So another question that's asked is it still possible for a person to have an orgasm after they've had gender-affirming surgery?
From the folks that I've seen talk about their experiences, the answer is yes. You'll be pleased to hear. It is more than possible. It's much more rare for folks to have permanently decreased sensation these days than the other way around. That being said, post-surgery for up to maybe about a year, possibly slightly longer, depends on the person, when you're healing, that will be the time when your nerve endings are still recovering from your surgery. So this means that you may experience some diminished feeling for a while, but orgasm will still be possible even relatively early. And then as you heal, that should continue to improve.
And there is even a technique that some surgeons will use that leaves the neurovascular bundle fully intact, which is the tip of the penis just gets reduced in size to form a sort of neoclitoris instead. Depending on people's sensitivity, different mileage for different people in terms of how intense their orgasms will be, but there is still plenty of opportunity to orgasm after having gender-affirming surgery.
It's the same the other way around as well. So the clitoris is full of nerve endings that can then be used in the phallus when it's formed. If you're going for transmasculine surgery, same applies.
Orgasms for everybody.
Huzzah! On to something that's a little bit more about how we feel as people rather than medical procedures. So the next question we found was from someone asking, is there any part of you that is genuinely worried that it is just a phase?
Society is built for particular people of particular characteristics, and to not fit into those predefined boxes can be quite tricky. And I think that does cause a lot of self-doubt at times, because sometimes it does feel like, oh, maybe it would be easier if this was just a phase. I wonder, maybe it is, maybe it isn't. But I think sometimes that can also lead to a lot of depression, which is why mental health is a big thing for the LGBTQ plus community.
For anyone who's queer, essentially, you're brought up being told that this is the norm, this is what normal looks like. And when you feel like you don't fit into that, you're questioning. But questioning means you're questioning everything, because you keep being told, no, this is what you're supposed to be, and it's just a phase. And so it can be quite a long journey for a lot of us. And this is why you'll often see people changing how they identify or what sexuality they think they are over time. So it can be a journey, kind of really discovering who you are and what language fits with that.
And I think what we also see is that for some of us, it's maybe quicker to go through that sort of questioning and working out who you are as a person. And for other people, it can take years, decades even. And it's why we're never to push people out of the closet, whatever closet they're in, because it is up to that person themselves to go through that journey of, am I this sexuality or that sexuality? Am I this gender? Am I that gender? Am I no gender? Okay, then. Let's have a question. But this time, we're going to do a 3-for-1 deal. If you're transitioning male to female and are on hormone replacement therapy, but you haven't yet had bottom surgery, some of the common questions that can come up are: 1, does the penis shrink up and become unusable? 2, can you still have penetrative sex? And obviously, for leading on from that second question, can you still get someone pregnant via penetration?
Looking at the first one, does the penis shrink up? The answer is it varies. Some people retain full size and some people will lose some size. That doesn't necessarily mean that it becomes unusable, simply that the size may change slightly as a result of the hormones that you're on.
And in terms of penetrative sex, yes. As we've said, it's the penis is still usable.
Regardless of size, it works.
So there is still the option for penetrative sex.
Finally, is it possible to still get someone pregnant? Kind of. So I will say that it can be affected by hormones. So it can get a little bit complicated. But for example, there are trans men who are still able to get pregnant while on testosterone, depending on what kind of medication they have. And there are trans women who are able to get other people pregnant while they're on hormones as well. It is worth noting that it does vary from person to person. So for example, when trans women are on HRT for a number of years, they can end up being sterile for the rest of their life. So best to check with your doctor.
I think a common theme I'm seeing developing is, again, for most of these answers, it is really person specific.
So our next question says, if you transition from male to female, can you still go bald as you get older, Or do the hormones actually prevent that from happening?
As we've been saying throughout the episode, it sort of depends, but usually hormones can prevent hair loss. Cis men, for example, can take. Fuck off. More medical terms. For example, cis men can take finasteride or dutasteride to help actually prevent hair loss. And it's a anti-androgen. Sick. It's an anti-androgen, but it only blocks the formation of a certain form of testosterone, which is DHT. So you don't generally get the bad effects of low T.
I've also heard from a number of trans women who've said that when they start taking hormones as part of their gender affirming care, that they can actually sometimes see some regrowth of hair where previously they might have been balding. So hormones can definitely have an impact on hair growth and hair loss.
I mean, it's the hormones that cause it to begin with, isn't it?
For some people, there will be no stopping it as they get older. And that doesn't just affect cis men, that can affect cis women as well. So it actually doesn't matter what gender or sex you are, everyone can be affected by hair loss. And sometimes hormones can help with that. Sometimes, sadly, it's just the way it is.
If I do ever go bald, I'm just going to have so much fun with wigs, and I'm going to pretend it's my hair and nobody's going to ask because I'm going to like have it weaved in so it doesn't come out.
That was my plan, was to have fun with wigs.
One windy day and away it goes.
Wild haggis.
I've got another hair-raising question.
Oh my.
So, if, for example, someone is born male but transitions to female and they're sexually attracted to men, are they considered gay prior to the transition, but then straight after the transition?
If you thought that you were a man who is attracted to other men, then you would quite likely call yourself gay. But if you later discover that you're actually a woman, but you're still attracted to men, then you're not gay. Unless you also think women are very pretty and non-binary people are very sexy. And, you know, who knows? They may discover along the journey that gender is actually not a binary thing and that everybody is gorgeous.
Well, some people. No saving this face. It's funny. I suppose it stems from that fear that some people will have before going through with this sort of gender affirming care and surgery, where if they're in a relationship with someone, will that change that relationship?
I think if we were to boil it down to the very basics of the question, so someone has transitioned from being a man to being a woman, and they've always been attracted to men, technically, you could say that they were always straight. The transitioning doesn't actually, you can be trans before you actually transition. So they always were who they were. It's just they hadn't necessarily taken any steps towards that yet, and maybe didn't have a word to explain what they were yet. But technically, I'd argue they were always straight because they were actually always a woman inside.
It's fair to say that just because somebody may be trans and having gender affirming care, the change in gender and how that's presented to the world and how they feel about their body, that isn't always linked to sexuality. And I think that's something that we see the right-wing part of society definitely confuse a lot more. But gender and sexuality are different components of people.
Shall we have another question?
I'd love another question, Alaska.
Our next question says, do non-binary people or people who are gender fluid count as trans, even if they still mostly present as their gender assigned at birth with no intent to change?
Well, the answer is it depends on the person.
What a surprise! Oh.
It's fair to say that some non-binary people or gender fluid people will identify as being part of the trans umbrella, and other non-binary and gender fluid people will feel that that's not a label that fits for them, and they're happy just to be determined as non-binary. I think even on this call, actually, I think we fall on two sides of that camp, don't we?
Yeah, we do. I would definitely class myself as being under the trans umbrella because I recognize that my gender is not the one assigned at birth. However, Sister Babushka, I think you're comfortable just being non-binary and not calling that trans.
I, as a non-binary person, I spent many years not even hearing of non-binary being categorized under the trans umbrella because, again, our education system in the UK is just so good for queer people. But it also feels to me that I don't feel there's just one or two genders for people to be in, so there's not a binary choice. And I'm fine with that. And being ever so loosely defined as non-binary feels like enough for me.
And I reckon, regardless of what label people choose to use for themselves, it's important to note that transitioning is not mandatory. You do not have to transition in order to be trans or non-binary. And transitioning is a bigger thing than just medical transitioning. There's also social transitioning. So, for example, if a non-binary person chooses to change their name, that is a form of transition, even if they still dress the way they've always dressed and they don't have any surgeries, they have still done an element of transitioning. But none of that is required for them to just be the person that they are. They're still valid.
People can have whatever labels feel most comfortable for them.
Yeah, I think for a lot of people, when they hear the word trans, they think about medical stuff and they don't necessarily realize that being trans is wider than just a medical experience, just your body, that it's a social thing. There are cultural norms that play into it. There's behaviors that play into it. And so someone doesn't need to medically or visibly transition in order to be trans or non-binary or gender fluid.
Thank you for coming to Alaska's TED Talk. Well, Alaska, I think we've maybe reached the end of the questions for today.
I think that is more than enough questions for today. I'm sure people have got plenty more, so we can always do another episode later on where we address even more trans questions that you've always wanted to ask. But for today, hopefully, you've learned a few things that you didn't know before.
Obviously, we're not experts and we don't speak on behalf of the whole trans community. As we've touched on a lot of these things can depend person to person. And so don't just take everything as gospel, but hopefully it's given a wider insight into the trans experience that people will go through. And if people do have other burning questions, it would be great to even have them submitted in the comments below. Or if you don't want to leave a comment on YouTube, you can always give us a message through our website.
Absolutely. And you know me, Sister Alaska Lot, I always like to encourage asking a lot of questions. So if you have your questions, send them forth and we shall answer.
What a lovely chat we had, Alaska.
It's been a delightful time spent with you, Sister Babushka.
Always. And don't forget, she may have been hiding in the back, but Joan's been here listening.
Always listening.
Watch her just disappear. Oh yeah, we have to tell them what's happening next, don't we?
Because we have a wonderful, hilarious episode planned for you next time, stuffed full of nonsense.
I would expect nothing less from utter nonsense. Next month, we're going back to our favourite series, Weird History of Nuns.
We're not going to spoil the surprise. We have a number of hilarious historical nun stories, and which one we pick for next time will be a bit of a mystery, so you'll have to watch to find out the weird and wonderful history of nuns.
If you can't wait until April for those hilarious nun stories, you can actually get a little bit of extra content by following the YouTube, because we release videos every other week, little short snippets of pure nonsense, as well as some Ask a Sisters about some more serious topics. And if you follow us on all our other socials, you'll see some of the other things that we're getting up to.
And with that, I think it's time to say that we have done the thing.
I did the thing!
We did the thing. 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 My face is flickering in and out of existence. Oh no. Oh no.
Good. Now it's a Joan show.